So how many of you would have imagined that in 10, 15 years, environmentalists are actually supporting nuclear power because of its carbon relative neutrality? Who would have thought that? Because there was such a stark divide some years back. How many of us could have predicted the price of solar power crashing the way that it has in just a few years? So I think the only thing that I take as someone, as a scholar, professor, researcher for a long time in this space, is the only constant is change. And so if anyone tries to make simple extrapolations for decadal periods, it's a very heroic task that they're doing. So when we're talking about sustainability, energy security, a lot of people have meant it to be energy independence. And the Trump administration in the US now talks about energy dominance as their national policy. But I want to start with this one question. What is energy security to someone who is in that 60% we heard this morning who don't have much energy? They have no electricity. We saw the statistics in beautiful illustrations. If somebody doesn't have electricity, they don't really care whether it came from coal, solar, or nuclear, or anything else. Now, of course, what does it mean to get electricity is a different debate. Is it just the wire? Obviously not. So the first step is we need to get the houses wired. But the second is we need meaningful electrification with quality service, no load shedding. So that's an even harder task ahead of us. But I can assure you, a good fraction of our population doesn't really care about carbon. Okay, so spot poll for the audience, since we're post-lunch, and as professors, we always try and keep our audience awake, which in my case is always tough for me and my students. How many of you love renewables? Okay, very few hands. Okay, how many of you are willing to pay a substantial premium for renewable energy? Less hands went up. I would say a minority of the even starting minority. And that's really this dilemma. Carbon is certainly a concern, and India as a responsible nation has commitments at Paris. But India cannot be blamed for the carbon situation of the world, and it's absolutely unrealistic, forget unfair, to try and expect India to be the solution for this global problem. And if you've seen the newest data, these actually show that developing countries are almost all on track to meet their Paris commitments, while developed countries are almost all behind schedule to meeting their Paris commitments. So that's a very stark reality of what's ahead of us. We talk about energy security, and the first thing that comes up before nuclear even is coal. 78 or some 75+% of electricity last year came out of coal. Sure, renewables is growing, but coal is here. It's domestic, and it's not going away anytime soon, grand plans on renewables or nuclear notwithstanding. I mean, they will grow over time. So now there's this other worry, is coal going to become a stranded asset? You look at oil companies around the world, they're saying, I've got trillions of assets, which are actually going to be worthless in a short amount of time. So how is India thinking about this? And the unfortunate answer is, there's a bit of, sorry to use this term, schizophrenia with policy. There isn't holistic policies on energy when it comes to coal versus renewables, coal and renewables. You can use the word nuclear as well in this. At one side, people are saying coal is dirty. No bank wants to fund a coal power plant. You have taxes, cesses on coal, which actually pay for railways. Passengers are overwhelmingly subsidized by coal power. Every time you turn on that light switch, tens of paise are being paid for passengers per unit for railways. We also have the coal cess, which government likes to call a carbon tax, but it's not quite a carbon tax. That cess is now being used to pay for GST. So there's burdens on coal, and it's not an apples to apples comparison when people talk about grid parity of coal and renewable. So when you talk to government people and you ask, what's the future going to look like that's secure, that's sustainable? And usually you hear this answer that many scholars love, of course, is all of the above. It's going to be a portfolio. There's no one silver bullet. We need a bit of all. However, it's important to recognize all of the above is not a policy or a strategy. We actually may end up as all of the above. But there needs to be clarity on what and why of how much you want different things. We need frameworks. Why don't we have better coordination? We have ambitious targets on coal, ambitious targets on renewables. You can't have both of them. You don't have that much demand. In part due to economics, service sector economy, in part due to energy efficiency, which is actually a very good thing. So we heard already this issue of jurisdictions in the even in this panel, our chairman pointed out of ministries of coal versus petroleum, natural gas. But it's even harder than that, because your jurisdictional problem is not just horizontally, but also geographically center, state, and city. If you talk about energy in India, and especially electricity, no discussion can happen without the word discoms, because that's really the weakest link. The distribution companies, the utilities, are the weakest link in the electricity chain. And of course, you can't say the word electricity and discoms without also thinking about agriculture, which is one of the major challenges in viability of this sector. So the best analogy I've heard someone give was once cars, lack of systems thinking. When internal combustion engines, vehicles, typical sedans, 80% of your energy is out the tailpipe waste heat. 19% moves the vehicle. So just 1% moves that human being. It's very stark. So every time I hear a company saying I'm improving my fuel efficiency, part of me asks, why not get rid of the car? So that's that systems level thinking of urban design, urban mass transport, mass transit that we really need. The best example for systems level thinking that somebody pointed out once was, instead of calling things like EVs, electric vehicles, we should call them EEVs, emissions elsewhere vehicles. Because where are these going to get their power from? In the short run, it's going to be coal in India. Now, India, you hear a lot of people saying we're going to have renewables power the electric vehicles. This marriage of EV and PV is harder than people think, because when are most electric vehicles going to be plugged in? Overnight. And how good is the sun in the middle of the night? Not so good. So this points out to this other barrier, of why we have these challenges, is not just lack of systems thinking, but there's a lot of averaging going around. Average numbers tell us only one part of the story. It's this granularity and details that really matter, because we all know the heterogeneity within India, across states, within states. And so how do we change that? So the flip side of granularity is actually differentiation, high information that can be tailored, customized to what solutions make sense for what segment or even what users. If somebody as an individual has a willingness to pay for clean energy, or if you want zero load shedding and you're willing to pay, you don't want to pay for diesel, then technology can actually enable that through, for example, smart grids. Unfortunately, we've had a lot of a supply push. Solar energy gets a lot of excitement, and it should. The prices are falling. But we have to remember, at least in the coming 5-10 years, most likely, again, one can't predict, this is all opportunistic RE. Renewable energy that's opportunistic, take it when you can. When the wind blows or when the sun shines, you take it. But when you don't, you still come back to the grid. So you need other things as well. So what's missing in this conversation are things like the consumer, things like efficiency. Why don't we have enough emphasis on efficiency? This is a worldwide problem. Utilities make more money when they sell more product. That's the typical commercial land space of anything selling, cars or software or anything. Can we think of a world where instead people make more money by selling less product? And the only way we can get that is if we think of energy as a service, not energy as a product. So the service I want out of energy is heating, cooling, lighting, lifting water. Or in the case of pumping water, it's actually the food. So if I can think of the most efficient way to grow my food with the least energy, let the utility make the same amount of money. The problem is we don't differentiate electricity properly. We treat it like a basket of fruit. This basket of fruit is sold for 5 rupees a kilo or 5 rupees a kilowatt hour. And that basket actually includes mangoes, bananas, lychees, watermelon, different costs, different times of day that these are available, different ramping characteristics, predictability, locations, but we blend it and sell it. Problem with that is it masks the signaling needed for people to really save at the margin. Where if you saved your dirtiest or most expensive electricity, then it would be worth not 5 rupees, but it would be worth 15 or 20 or more rupees per kilowatt hour. So the future, in closing, I think really needs to be smarter. And I'm saying this not just as a proponent or someone who spent decades working in smart grids. It's information that's the first step of smartness. So carrying forward this banana or fruit analogy, if I put 2 fruits in front of you, you couldn't tell me where it came from. I could have carried one from Bangalore, where I flew in from this morning, and one being local. They look the same, but you don't know what the carbon or the embedded carbon in any of those is. So now people are talking about putting carbon labels on your, like your bottle of water could say grams carbon to use this product. It helps, but it's not enough because that's just manufacturing. What about transport? It's very hard to put that on the label. So carrying that analogy forward, let's say you have a product, not this one, but many products have energy as only 10 or 20% of the cost. The rest of it is actually smarts, engineering, IPR, something else. So if 10% is energy, and it costs 30% more to have sustainable energy for that product, that means I only need to pay 3% extra to get a sustainable product. How many of you would be willing to pay 2 or 3% more for a lot of your products? More hands went up this time. How many of you think you know how to get such a product? There aren't those choices, whether it's due to information asymmetries or supply chain problems. We don't have such options available. So we need to start small with niches. Let's start with smart systems that can give better, cleaner energy or cleaner products to niches of the population. I don't expect all of India overnight to change. That's another policy limitation. Too many of our policies are pan-India. They're sort of top-down. We need things that are more experimental to the local needs, local cultural, local willingnesses. So once we experiment with a niche, I'm always heartened by this fact that a niche of India is bigger than a country in Europe. So there's scale. So to make this happen, we need smart solutions that are easy. So convenience. If you tell somebody to buy a smart air conditioner, a smart fridge, we'd like to, but what does that mean? Is it even available? If it's available, there are just 3 things we need for this future that's in the next 5, 10, 15 years. We don't know exactly when. First is your smart fridge or smart AC has to be convenient. Plug and play. It should be secure, and it shouldn't be that to use a Samsung smart fridge, I need a Samsung smart meter. It has to be interoperable, standards-based plug and play. Second, I need incentives. This gets back to one of the elephants in the room, which is proper pricing signals, such as time of day. Why will I shift my washing machine load or air conditioning from peak to off-peak unless there's something in it for me? Third, control. End of the day, as a citizen or consumer, if I want to take a hot bath, even if it's the peak in the grid, I will take a hot bath. Dear utility, please don't stop my geyser. So sustainability is going to evolve and happen over time. It's a question of, I think, when, not if. Good news is, in India, people are engaged with the grid. You tell people in the West, change your lifestyle, change your consumption, use a smart meter, and you may save $2 a month. They don't care. It's a slice of pizza. In India, you tell somebody, you shift your load from peak to off-peak, you do a little behavioral change, you may save 50 rupees a month, you'll have 0 load shedding. They're very interested. So our citizens are already engaged with the grid. Our IT industry is one of the best in the world. I think we have the ingredients to actually get a smarter and cleaner future. It'll happen when we stop thinking about energy as trade-offs between supplier and consumer, winners and losers, and triangulate to a win-win-win sort of situation. Thank you.